The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. The word of the Lord. A few years ago, there was a story about two men who walked into the same church every Sunday. One was a successful young businessman. He arrived early. He parked in the same parking spot, sat in the same pew, and made sure people saw him putting an envelope in the offering plate. When he spoke, he did so in a way that was eloquent and loud, and he liked to be noticed. After worship, he would often give the minister little critiques of the sermon, making sure that people just understood how discerning he was. The other man usually came late. He sat near the back, sometimes still wearing the clothes from his warehouse job that he had worked that night shift the night before. He didn't speak to many people, often kept his head bowed. His prayers weren't eloquent, but they were honest. And each week he came because he needed something he couldn't provide for himself. Over time, people started to notice a difference between the two. The businessman's presence didn't change him. His attendance was more about maintaining his image than encountering God. The warehouse worker, who came quietly and humbly, found that worship transformed him. He left each Sunday with a little more peace and a little more aware of grace. Now, that story probably could have taken place in any number of churches, but it mirrors the scene that Jesus describes in today's passage. Two men going up to the temple to pray. One is respected, accomplished, and proud of it. The other is despised, labeled a sinner by others, and acutely aware of his need for mercy. Both walk up the steps to the temple, but their postures and their hearts are very different. The Pharisee in Jesus' story represents someone who has done everything right. He's part of the religious elite, the Pharisees, someone others look up to. He follows the rules, obeys the rituals, and makes a point of telling God all about it. His prayer is less of a conversation with God than it is a reminder, a statement of his resume. He reminds God just how morally upright he is and how generous he is in his giving, how disciplined he is in his spiritual practices. More troubling than his self-congratulations is his comparison to the other man. He thanks God that he is not like those who he considers beneath him, especially that tax collector. In other words, he defines his worth not by God's mercy, but by his self-decided moral superiority. This elitism is subtle but destructive. It creeps into the way we measure ourselves against others, especially when it comes to spiritual matters. We may not say it out loud, but how often do we think, well, at least I'm not like that? How often do we quietly use others as a yardstick for our righteousness? The Pharisee had a heart that was closed off from grace. He doesn't come to God as someone in need. He comes as someone who thinks he's already arrived. He ascends the temple steps proud, and he will leave exactly as he came, unchanged. The tax collector provides us with a great contrast. He is aware of his failings and his brokenness. He knows what he's done and the people that he's cheated. And he doesn't approach the altar. He stands back at a distance. He doesn't lift his eyes. He bows his head. His prayer is brief, but it's sincere. He doesn't try to justify himself. He doesn't try to list his accomplishments. He simply asks for mercy. Tax collectors in Jesus' times were despised because, first of all, they were working for the Roman occupation. And secondly, because they often exploited their own people for their personal gain. This man knows his reputation in town. He knows what others think of him. He still comes to the temple anyway. He knows that transformation won't happen if he stays outside. He needs God. And because of that, his prayers are the truest act of worship in this story. The key to this parable is not about who they are when they're going up the steps of the temple. It's who they are when they're going back. The Pharisee ascends confident in his own righteousness, leaves unchanged. His heart remains untouched. God's grace does not permeate him because he thinks he doesn't need it. The tax collector arrives broken and aware of his need, and then he descends from the temple, forgiven, restored, and made whole. New Testament scholar Joel Green observes, the Pharisee assumes that his piety has set him apart from the rest of humanity. But in doing so, he separates himself from God's mercy. The tax collector, by contrast, relies entirely on God's generosity, and so receives it. The difference is not between someone who is morally good and someone who is morally bad. The difference is in someone who trusts in themselves and someone who trusts in God. We may not have Pharisees and tax collectors in that same way today, but we have our own versions of religious elitism. It can appear in a way where we measure our spiritual worth by our outward appearances of who knows the right theological terms, or who participates in the most committees, or who has the longest history in the church. It can show up in how we draw our lines between good Christians and those people. Sometimes it takes the form of subtle condescension towards those who are new or those who come from different backgrounds. Or it's when churches create an atmosphere that caters only to the insiders and makes outsiders feel unwelcome. The parable forces us to ask, when we walk into the sanctuary, do we do so as a Pharisee or as a tax collector? Do we come to God expecting him to validate our goodness, or do we come aware of our need for grace? Notice that both men went to the temple, same time, for the same purpose, to pray. Yet only one left changed. The difference wasn't the location, the difference wasn't the liturgy, or even the prayer. The difference was the posture of their heart. When we approach God with humility, we open ourselves to transformation. Humility doesn't mean groveling or self-hatred. It means recognizing that we cannot earn God's grace and that we stand in need of mercy, just like everyone else. In worship, humility allows us to receive God's grace rather than try to prove that we deserve it. The businessman and the warehouse worker had both entered the same church. But one's presence was about maintaining his status, while the other's was about seeking God. Week by week, their souls were shaped by the posture of their heart in which they entered the sanctuary. As a community, we're called to reflect the grace of God, not the elitism of the Pharisee. The church should not be a place where people feel they need to be present, where people need to present their spiritual resume at the door. It should be a place where people can stand honestly before God, knowing that mercy is available to all. Every Sunday, people arrive at church. Some come confident in their religious track record. Others come more aware of their brokenness. The good news is that God meets all of us where we're at. But only those who have an open heart will have grace transform their lives. May we be the kind of people and the kind of church who walks in God's presence, not with pride, but with humility. May we descend those steps, not boasting in ourselves, but rejoicing in God's mercy. Because in the end, the one who knows their needs is the one who receives the gift. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.